The Ashwake was not the Corvith Dominion's finest ship. It was a third-generation survey cruiser, gray and dented, held together by 200 years of institutional pride and duct tape that the crew insisted on calling ceremonial hull sealant. It had been sent to the fringe of the Perseus Reach because nothing important was expected to happen there. Nothing important ever happened at the edge of a dead trade route around a yellow star with 3 unremarkable rocky planets and 1 blue one that nobody had bothered to survey in 400 years. Subcommander Yaren Vale had drawn the posting as a punishment, technically, though nobody on the bridge ever said so out loud. 11 months earlier she'd argued too loudly with a Fabrication Guild inspector about a shipment of substandard hull plating, and 11 months later she was babysitting a rust bucket on a route, so quiet the sensor logs mostly recorded comets. She had grown, in that time, to appreciate the quiet. It let her read. It let her think. It let her run drills without anyone from the capital looking over her shoulder and pretending her career mattered. She was 3 chapters into a history of the Threshold Wars, feet up on the console rail in a way that would have horrified any inspector, when the sensors screamed. "Report!" she snapped, boots hitting the deck before she'd finished the word. Her crest feathers, still molting from the long transit out, rose in alarm despite herself. "Gravimetric anomaly, ma'am. 0.2 light seconds off the blue planet's 3rd moon." The sensor officer's voice cracked slightly. Young man, first deployment, the kind who still triple-checked every reading before reporting it, which was precisely why Yaren trusted him. It's a structure. Artificial. Enormous. Define enormous. 40 kilometers across, ma'am. It's not moving. It doesn't read as a weapon platform, doesn't read as a station in any configuration our threat library has on file. It reads like a... He hesitated, and when he spoke again his voice had gone strange, almost embarrassed, as if he expected to be laughed at. "It reads like a garden, ma'am." Yaren crossed to his station and looked at the raw data herself, because in 11 years of service she had learned that impossible readings were usually just readings nobody had bothered to understand yet. He wasn't wrong. "Biological signatures throughout the entire superstructure," he continued, scrolling through layer after layer of scan data. "Water vapor. Chlorophyll analogs, but not quite, the spectral signatures close but not identical to anything in the botanical database. Thermal gradients consistent with active, cultivated growth, not decay, not dormancy. Salive, ma'am, or at least most of it is, but it's also radiating in frequencies I don't have a category for. Not electromagnetic, not in the way we use the word. It's humming. The whole structure is humming. And, ma'am, this is going to sound insane, the moon's crust underneath it is humming back. Like the two of them are talking. On the tactical display the structure resolved, slowly, out of a blur of raw returns into something the human eye, or the Corvith eye, 4-lidded and violet-slitted, but no less unsettled, could actually parse. Vast branching towers of some pale, faintly luminous material, curling around one another like frozen coral reef stretched to the size of a small city, threaded through with capillaries of soft light that pulsed in a slow, unhurried rhythm. Not the rigid, metronomic blink of Dominion machinery. Something closer to breathing. "Helm, hold position," Yaren said. "Weapons do not, I repeat, do not arm anything. Comms, send the standard first contact packet. Species classification, temporal reference frame, standard greeting protocols. Keep the tone as neutral as the translator matrix allows. Let's see what kind of primitive builds a garden the size of a city and hums to a moon." The comms officer sent it. Then they waited, the whole bridge crew unconsciously holding their breath, watching the chronometer count seconds that felt, in that thick silence, considerably longer than they were. The response came back in 11 seconds, remarkably, almost insultingly fast for a species that, according to the Dominion's 400-year-old survey data, had no confirmed spaceflight capability at all. The last full assessment of this system, filed by a board cartography drone in an era before Yaren's grandmother was hatched, had rated the 3rd planet as pre-industrial, low priority, reassess in 200 years. Someone clearly had forgotten to reassess. It wasn't a greeting. It was a question, rendered by the Ashwake's translation matrix into something that landed, on the bridge, with the flat, unnerving weight of a held breath finally released. "Why are you circling our nursery?" Yaren stared at the words on the screen for a long moment. Behind her, she heard the young censor officer swallow audibly. "Ma'am," he said. "Should I answer?" "No," Yaren said slowly. "I think I should." 3 hours later, Yaren Vale stood before the Regional Grand Council on Threll Prime, delivering her report to a chamber that had gone very, very quiet, a silence she had not expected, given that she'd spent the shuttle ride down rehearsing 3 separate ways to defend her decision to withdraw the Ashwake without attempting a deeper survey. "They call the structure a reef," she said. "Not a station. A reef. It is not their only one." Before we were asked, politely but very clearly, to withdraw, our long-range scans caught gravitational analogs at 6 additional points throughout their home system, including 1 in close orbit around their own sun. I do not believe that was a full accounting, counselors. I believe that was what they were comfortable letting us see. "Impossible," muttered Counselor Dessa Oren, senior of the Fabrication Guild, a stout woman whose entire career had been built on the doctrine that civilization was measured in tolerances and alloys. "No species grows a space station. Structures require refined materials, require precision, require engineering, Subcommander. What you describe is a fairy tale for hatchlings. With respect, Counselor, I saw it with my own sensors, and so did every officer on my bridge," Yaren said, keeping her voice level though her crest betrayed her with a slow, defensive rise. "And when we attempted a deeper scan, the kind of penetrating sweep we use on unknown installations to map internal architecture, the entire reef responded. It did not jam our sensors the way a hostile installation would. It matched our scanning frequency, note for note, and sang it back distorted, like an insult returned with interest. Our sensor suite went dark for 4 minutes. Not damaged, dark, as though it had simply been asked, very firmly, to stop looking. Every officer on that bridge said the silence afterward felt wrong. Heavy, like being watched by something very old that had decided, for the moment, to be patient with us. Emperor Threll IX, seated at the head of the chamber on a throne of black scarite stone, leaned forward for the first time since the briefing began. His crest, iron-gray with age and threaded through with the pale scarring of old campaigns no one in the room but him remembered firsthand, was utterly still, a sign, to those who had served him long enough to know it, of real attention rather than the customary bored courtesy he extended to routine survey reports. "Subcommander," he said, "you classified this species as primitive in your original mission brief, based on the 400-year-old survey. Do you still believe that classification, having seen what you have seen?" Yaren hesitated. In 11 years of service, including the humiliation of her posting to the Reach, she had never once hesitated in front of the Emperor. "No, Majesty," she said finally. "I believe we have found something the Dominion has never truly encountered in 10,000 years of expansion. Every species we have ever met we measured against our own path, refine the alloy, tighten the tolerance, perfect the machine. I believe these people did not build their civilization along that path at all. And I believe that if they had wanted the Ashwake gone in any permanent sense, they could have made her gone, quietly, and we would never have known to be afraid. Instead, they only asked us to leave. I do not know what to call that, Majesty. Mercy, perhaps, or patience with something they don't yet consider a threat." A long silence held the chamber. General Threx Collier, commander of the 3rd Fleet, a broad-shouldered veteran of 40 campaigns with a scar pattern across one side of his face that marked him as a survivor of the brutal Ixari pacification, made a low sound of contempt from his seat. "Mercy," he repeated. "Subcommander, with respect, you are describing a garden that hummed at your sensors and a message asking politely to be left alone. That is not evidence of a threat. That is evidence of a frightened, primitive species that got lucky enough to startle a bored survey crew." "General," Yaren said, her voice tightening, "I have commanded ships along 3 separate frontiers. I know the difference between fear and patience. What I felt from that structure was not fear." "Enough," the Emperor said, and the chamber quieted instantly. He studied Yaren for a long moment, his ancient, weathered gaze unreadable. "It seems, Subcommander, that mercy or patience or whatever it was the first lesson these humans taught the Dominion, whether we asked to learn it or not. Let us see if we are wise enough to learn it properly, before pride teaches us the same lesson a harder way. Prepare a formal diplomatic vanguard. I want to know exactly what we are dealing with, and I want that knowledge gathered by someone I trust, not to let his temper answer questions his patience should be asking instead. His gaze shifted, deliberately, to Admiral Sarn Vek, seated in the officers' gallery. Admiral, you will lead it. Admiral Sarn Vek did not believe in gardens that hummed. He had spent 40 years commanding Dominion battle groups along the Threshold Wars, had personally overseen the pacification, the Dominion's polite word. Every other species in the sector simply called it conquest of the Ixari cluster, and had never once encountered a threat that superior firepower and disciplined tactics could not eventually resolve. He read Yaren Vale's report twice on the transit out, decided privately that the subcommander had let nerves color her sensor logs, and requested, successfully, over Counselor Dessa Oren's objections, that a survey matter did not warrant a full admiral's attention. Personal command of the diplomatic vanguard sent to formally open relations with the species the Dominion's linguists were now calling Terrans. After the name the Reef's return signal had used for itself, Earth. His flagship, the ironclad Word, was a mailed fist of a vessel. 2 kilometers of layered scarite plate, 60 heavy resonance cannons arranged in the elegant, refined batteries that had ended every siege the Dominion had ever needed to end, and a crew who had never once lost a fight they were ordered to win. They arrived at the edge of Sol System on what human records would later call a Tuesday morning, though there was no morning in the void between stars, only the eternal dark, broken here by 7 human vessels holding a loose, unhurried formation near the heliopause. Not warships by any silhouette Sarn's tacticians recognized from 1,000 years of galactic conflict. Long, asymmetric, textured like something between coral and driftwood, hulls the color of old bone laced through with soft veins of blue bioluminescence beneath a translucent outer layer that seemed, disconcertingly, to shift and flex with the same slow rhythm as breath. "They're not shielded, sir," Sarn's tactical officer reported, puzzled, cycling through every sensor mode the ironclad Word possessed. "No energy signature consistent with any deflector technology in our library. No visible armament, no turret housings, no missile bays, no charged capacitor banks. Admiral, by every metric we have, those ships are simply unarmed. It's like meeting a fleet of pleasure yachts and being told they're a navy." "Then this negotiation should be brief," Sarn said, and opened the channel, allowing himself, for just a moment, the small satisfaction of imagining how quickly this would resolve. The human who answered wore no uniform insignia that meant anything to Dominion eyes. Simple dark fabric. A small woven emblem over the heart that Sarn's translator matrix couldn't parse into anything more specific than belonging. She had close-cropped gray hair and the calm, unhurried bearing of someone who had done this exact thing many times before, though Dominion intelligence insisted, with high confidence, that this was humanity's first true contact with any starfaring power at all. "Admiral," she said, "I'm Envoy Elena Reyes, Terran Compact. Welcome to our system. I understand you'd like to talk." "I would like," Sarn said, letting the unspoken weight of the ironclad Word sit behind his words the way it always had on 100 worlds, "to understand what you are, Envoy. Our survey vessel described your structure as growing rather than built. I confess skepticism." Reyes smiled, and there was something in it that made Sarn, a man who had stared down warlords twice his mass without blinking, feel briefly irrationally, like a student being humored by a patient teacher who already knew exactly how the lesson would end. "We didn't build our way into the stars, Admiral," she said. "We grew our way here. It's a different question to ask of matter, not how do I force this into the shape I need, but how do I convince this to become the shape I need, and then keep on becoming it long after I've stopped watching. Everything you're looking at in our fleet is alive in the sense that actually matters. It adapts. It heals. It listens. We stopped drawing a hard line between biology and engineering about 140 years ago. Turned out, the closer we looked, the line was never really there to begin with. We just hadn't noticed." "A charming philosophy," Sarn said, "for a civilization with no visible weapons." "We didn't say we had no weapons," Reyes replied, mild as ever, unbothered. "We said you can't see them. There's a meaningful difference, Admiral, and I'd genuinely rather you not learn it the hard way. Would you like to continue this conversation aboard the Meridian?" I think it'll go better face to face than across a comm channel that keeps making both of us sound more hostile than we mean to be. Sarn's strategist, Captain Iron Voss, half her skull replaced with augment lattice after a battlefield injury 3 decades prior in the Ixari campaign, one organic eye and one the deep-processed violet of Dominion optical replacement, leaned close to his ear, her voice pitched low enough that the open channel wouldn't carry it. Admiral, sensors are reading something odd from their lead ship. Structural resonance, low frequency, building slowly. It doesn't match any weapons charge signature in our library. But it isn't nothing, either. I'd advise caution before we send anyone aboard. Understood. Sarn straightened, addressing the screen again. Envoy Reyes, before we accept your hospitality, I must ask you to power down whatever system is currently active aboard your vessel. My officers have noted a resonance buildup. For the first time, something flickered across Reyes's calm expression. Not fear, Sarn thought, studying it carefully. Something closer to disappointment, the particular weariness of someone who had hoped, honestly hoped, this part could be skipped. Admiral, that's not a weapon charging, she said. That's the meridian clearing her throat, more or less, because your fleet's tactical scanners have been probing our hull integrity for the last 6 minutes at a frequency that, where we come from, is roughly the conversational equivalent of grabbing a stranger by the collar and shouting directly into their ear. She doesn't care for it. I'd suggest you stop. Not because I'm threatening you, Admiral, but because I would genuinely rather you not find out what our ships do when they decide, on their own, that they've had quite enough of being interrogated. Sarn Vek had led armadas. He had broken sieges that lasted decades without ever once raising his voice. He was not accustomed to being lectured on manners by an unarmed envoy aboard what still, by every sensor he had, looked like a garden with engines. Stand down the scan, he ordered curtly over the internal channel, and did not enjoy at all, how quickly his tactical officer complied, as if the entire ironclad Word's bridge crew had already, independently and without discussion, decided this was not a fight worth starting. Aboard the Meridian, the Dominion delegation walked corridors that breathed. That was the only word Sarn's science attaché could find for it, muttered under his breath as they passed through bulkheads that were not metal at all but something warmer, cross-hatched with fine luminous capillaries that pulsed gently in time with some rhythm the ship itself seemed to keep, independent of any crew directive Sarn could observe. The air smelled, faintly and impossibly, of rain on stone. A smell Sarn hadn't encountered since a childhood spent on the wet southern coast of Threll Prime, and one he was quite certain no engineered life support system had any business producing. Grown, not built, Reyes said again, watching their reactions with quiet, unhurried patience, as though she had walked delegations through this exact corridor and this exact moment of disorientation many times before, on many other first contacts humanity's history books had apparently never needed. Every ship in our fleet is cultivated from a seed lattice, engineered originally by us over generations of careful research, but self-organizing after that initial design, the way a coral reef organizes itself, the way a forest grows into whatever shape the land and light allow. We plant the ship. Then we grow alongside it together for years. It learns the crew it carries. It learns the threats it survives. Nothing that has ever fought a Meridian-class vessel and lost gets the chance to teach it the same trick twice. That sounds, Iron Voss said carefully, her augmented eye cycling through structural scans faster than her expression let on. Less like a starship and more like an organism that has convinced itself it also has a starship's job to do. Reyes glanced at her, something like genuine respect flickering across her face. That's the most perceptive thing anyone from your delegation has said today, Captain. You're closer to the truth than the Admiral, I think, is entirely comfortable with just yet. They reached a wide chamber at the ship's heart, not a bridge in any configuration Dominion doctrine recognized as a command center, but something closer to an amphitheater, its curved walls a living lattice of pale coral bone material, threaded through with light that responded, Sarn noticed with growing and specific unease, to the sound of their own voices, brightening and dimming in patterns he couldn't quite parse as random. This is the Meridian's resonance core, Reyes said. Every system on this ship, propulsion, defense, sensors, life support, routes through structures very much like this one. We don't run a single central processing core with isolated redundant backups the way your fleet does, Admiral. I've read what the Dominion has made public about your engineering doctrine. It's elegant, precise, I mean that as a genuine compliment. Ours works differently. Every part of the ship is the computer, in a sense. Every part of it listens to every other part, constantly, the way your own body doesn't need to convene a committee meeting to decide to pull your hand back from an open flame. And your weapons, Sarn said, watching her carefully. You still have not shown me these mysterious weapons you keep alluding to. Reyes considered him for a long moment, and something in her expression made Sarn suddenly, uncomfortably aware that she was choosing her next words with far more care than anything she'd said so far. You won't like the answer, she said finally. But I think you'll respect it once I give you the short version. We don't fire projectiles at our enemies, Admiral. We fire silence. Every resonance-grown hull in our fleet can, if it truly needs to, phase lock onto the specific harmonic signature of an enemy vessel's own systems, shields, engines, weapons, it doesn't much matter which, and sing the precisely opposite note back at it. Not louder. Not more powerful in any raw energy sense your instruments would flag as dangerous. Just exactly, perfectly opposite. Your shields wouldn't be overwhelmed by our weapons the way they'd be overwhelmed by another Dominion fleet's cannons. They would simply be cancelled. Your engines wouldn't explode in some dramatic fireball. They would forget, for exactly as long as we chose, how to hold their own internal resonance together. It isn't destruction in the way your doctrine understands the word. It's disagreement expressed at the level of physics itself. The chamber went very quiet. Even the pulsing lights along the walls seemed, for a moment, to still. You're describing? Iron Voss said slowly. Her organic eye narrowed in something between fascination and dread, her augmented one flickering through rapid, silent calculation. A weapon that requires no energy discharge our instruments could detect coming. No warning signature. No countermeasure worth attempting because there would be nothing external to intercept. You'd be unmaking the function of our systems from the inside, not attacking their outer structure at all. Yes, Reyes said simply. Which is exactly why we've never had to use it against a first contact species before, Captain, and precisely why I'm telling you about it now in a quiet room, over what I believe your culture calls diplomatic courtesy, instead of letting your fleet discover it for the first time in the middle of an actual battle. I would very much rather this entire capability remain theoretical between our two peoples, Admiral. I don't think you would enjoy learning firsthand that it wasn't. Sarnvek sat with that confession for a long moment, turning it over in his mind, testing it methodically for the seams of a bluff, the small tells he'd learned to read across 40 years of negotiating with warlords and diplomats alike, and finding, to his considerable and growing discomfort, absolutely none. Why tell us this, he said finally, rather than simply demonstrating it, as your own Admiral's fleet doctrine, assuming you have one, would surely favor? Show strength. Command immediate respect. That is how first contact has always proceeded for the Dominion, in 10,000 years of history. Reyes's expression, for the first time since the delegation had come aboard, softened into something almost sorrowful. Because your survey ship, 3 months ago, asked our reef for permission before it withdrew, she said quietly. It didn't have to ask. Your own doctrine, from what little we've been able to study of it, would likely have called that weakness, asking, rather than simply taking whatever information it wanted. But it asked anyway, and that told us something important about who the Dominion might yet become, even if it isn't who you are today. We would rather grow a real peace with your people the way we grow everything else, Admiral, slowly, deliberately, and for real, than win a quick war that leaves us both permanently worse than we started. But we are not naive, and we are not unprepared. We know precisely how first contacts sometimes go, historically, for species that show up asking for peace and get answered with an ultimatum instead. So, now you know what we're capable of. What the Dominion decides to do with that knowledge is entirely, and only, up to the Dominion. A quiet investigation that night, ship night, by the ironclad word's adopted cycle, though there was of course no true night in the space between worlds, Captain Iron Voss did not sleep. She sat instead in the small, cramped auxiliary lab she'd claimed as her own aboard the flagship, running the recorded sensor logs from the Meridian through every analytical model in the Dominion's considerable engineering library, and finding again and again that none of them fit. Her augmented eye, the gift, if it could be called that, of the Ixari campaign that had cost her the organic one, along with most of the left side of her skull, flickered through simulation after simulation, trying to model how a resonance core could possibly track 25 independent harmonic signatures in real time without some form of centralized, brute force computation that the Meridian's architecture simply didn't appear to possess. It kept coming back to the same unsettling conclusion. The ship wasn't computing the enemy fleet's frequencies at all, in any sense the Dominion would recognize. It was listening to them, the way a musician in an orchestra listens for the note beside them and adjusts without needing to consciously calculate the mathematics of harmony. The Meridian wasn't running an algorithm. It was having a conversation with the space around it, and simply choosing each time how that conversation would end. "You're up late, Captain." Iron didn't startle. 30 years of military discipline had burned the reflex out of her long ago, but she did look up to find Admiral Vex standing in the lab's open hatch, still in his formal uniform from the day's negotiations, looking older than she'd seen him look in years. "Trying to understand what we're facing, Admiral," she said. "I'm not sure I like what I keep finding." "Nor I," Sarn admitted, stepping inside and studying the failed simulations scrolling across her console. "Tell me honestly, Captain, if it came to a real engagement, not a demonstration, not a negotiation, but a genuine fight, could our fleet win?" Iron was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words with the same care she'd have used disarming a live ordnance charge. "I don't know if win is even the right question to be asking, Admiral," she said finally. "I think the honest question is whether we would survive long enough to lose with any dignity. Every simulation I've run assumes the Terrans use their full capability from the first exchange. But Envoy Reyes made a point, more than once today, of telling us things she didn't have to tell us. I don't think that's weakness, and I don't think it's a bluff. I think it might be the single most dangerous thing about them. They're not hiding their strength to surprise us. They're showing it to us on purpose, hoping we're wise enough not to need the surprise at all." Sarn said nothing for a long moment, staring at the useless, contradictory simulation data. "The Emperor will want a recommendation from me within the week," he said at last. "Collier's faction will push for a demonstration of force regardless of what I report. Pride has a way of finding its own justifications, Captain, when it wants one badly enough. Then I'd advise you to write the most honest report of your career, Admiral," Iron said, "and hope that, for once, honesty is louder than pride." Sarn Vex's report to the Grand Council did not go the way either he or Envoy Reyes might have hoped. "A weapon that cannot be detected," Counselor Dessa Oren repeated, aghast, pacing before the assembled council in the great chamber beneath Threll Prime's twin suns, her voice climbing toward the particular pitch she reserved for engineering claims she found personally offensive. "A weapon with no discharge signature, no warning, no known countermeasure. And the Admiral's recommendation to this council is that we simply believe the word of the very species that claims to possess it?" "I did not say believe blindly, Counselor," Sarn said, his patience visibly fraying after 3 hours of circular argument. "I said their claim was consistent in every particular with technology we personally observed and could not explain, a fleet with no detectable weapon systems whatsoever, hulls that repair scanner-inflicted damage in real time, a flagship that responded to hostile frequency scanning with a resonance buildup our own instruments could not classify by any existing threat model. I am not asking the Council to trust the humans, counselors. I am asking the Council to fear them with appropriate precision, and to act with correspondingly greater caution than we have ever previously needed." "The Admiral of the Dominion," sneered General Threx Collier, rising from his seat with the deliberate menace of a man who had commanded fleets on 3 separate frontiers. "Advising caution? Since when does Sarn Vec flinch from an unarmed opponent? Admiral? I have fought beside you. I do not recognize this man standing before the Council today. Since I stood in a room built from living coral that dimmed and brightened with the sound of my own voice, General, and understood, genuinely viscerally understood, that I was a guest aboard something that could very plausibly unmake my flagship without ever raising a single weapon I could see coming," Sarn said flatly, meeting the General's glare without flinching. "Mock it if you like, Threx. I would rather be called a coward today, by you in this chamber, than be proven right about this tomorrow, in the wreckage of 25 ships and every soul aboard them." "Counselors, please," said Diplomat Rensselaes, the youngest member of the Council, and the only one present who had spent the better part of her career studying first contact protocol rather than fleet doctrine. May I remind this chamber that we have not yet even heard the full technical assessment? Captain Voss accompanied the Admiral. I believe her analysis deserves this council's attention before we descend further into shouting. The Emperor raised a hand, and the chamber quieted grudgingly. Captain Voss, he said, your engineering assessment. Speak plainly. Iron Voss stepped forward, her augmented eye flickering through the recorded data one final time before she spoke, her voice carrying the particular steadiness of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment in her head a dozen times overnight and refused to let it shake now that it had arrived. Majesty, everything in Dominion doctrine teaches us that technological superiority follows a straight line. Better alloys, tighter tolerances, more efficient energy transfer, refine and refine again until the machine approaches, as closely as matter allows, something like perfection. It is why our fleets have not lost a war in 3,000 years, and it is a doctrine I have personally believed my entire career. But the Terrans did not walk that line at all. They asked a different question from the very beginning of their engineering history. Not how do I perfect the machine I am building, but how do I cultivate something that keeps perfecting itself, long after I've stopped watching it. Their ships are not built to a fixed specification the way ours are. They are cultivated toward an outcome, and then permitted to keep adapting past whatever outcome we could ever hope to predict in advance. I do not say this to alarm the Council needlessly, Majesty. I say it because I genuinely do not believe conventional Dominion tactics were ever designed to fight an enemy that learns faster than our after-action reports can be written, filed, and studied. Then what precisely do you recommend, Captain? The Emperor asked, his weathered gaze steady on her. I recommend, Majesty, Iron said carefully, feeling the weight of every eye in the chamber, that the Dominion do something it has not done in 10,000 years of recorded history. I recommend we negotiate with the Terrans as genuine equals, before our own pride forces us to test their claims by force, and we lose something Dominion doctrine has simply never had to account for before, an enemy we cannot out-engineer, and can only, perhaps, outthink. General Collier slammed a mailed fist against the council rail hard enough that the sound echoed through the whole chamber. 10,000 years, Captain Voss. 10,000 years the Dominion has met every new species it encountered with strength, and strength alone, and every single one of them eventually came to understand their proper place within the order we built and maintained at great cost. You would have us kneel to a fleet of glorified space plants because a diplomat used pretty words and a choral hallway to unsettle two of our senior officers? I would have us survive, General, Iron said, unflinching, holding his glare without so much as a tremor in her augmented eye. There is no dishonor in surviving to see whether pride was worth what it cost. The council chamber dissolved, predictably, into open argument, Fabrication Guild counselors demanding an immediate covert intelligence gathering operation to reverse engineer whatever they could of the Terran technology. Military factions, led loudly by Collier, demanding a punitive strike before the humans grow bold enough to strike first, as every hesitant species eventually does. Diplomatic factions, Ren Sali's chief among them, pleading desperately for patience and further study. Through all of it, Emperor Threll IX sat silent on his throne of black stone, watching, weighing, his ancient crest utterly still, until, at last, with the particular unhurried authority of a man who had ruled for longer than most of the chamber had been alive, he rose. Enough, he said, and the chamber stilled instantly, the way a struck bell finally falls silent. General Collier, you believe strength, raw, demonstrable, undeniable strength, is the only language this galaxy has ever truly respected. I know it is, Majesty. It is the only language that ever built anything the Dominion has. Then you shall have the opportunity to test that belief personally, the Emperor said, and something in the particular gravity of his tone made even Sarn Vek go very still. Assemble the Third Fleet, 25 battle cruisers, full complement. You will proceed to Sol System under a formal flag of ultimatum. The Terrans will submit representative samples of their technology for Dominion study, accept a resident garrison as a demonstration of continued good faith, and formally acknowledge Dominion authority over the unclaimed trade lanes bordering their territory. If they refuse, the Emperor's crest lowered, grim and heavy. You will remind them, General, exactly how the Dominion built and maintained 10,000 years of galactic order. But mark me carefully, Threx, and mark me well. If Admiral Vec and Captain Voss have judged this threat correctly, and you find your fleet genuinely outmatched, you will withdraw immediately, with no shame attached whatsoever to that order. I would very much rather my general survive to have been wrong, than be proven entirely right and dead alongside 25 ships of loyal crew. Do you understand me completely, General Collier? Collier bowed low, fire still burning undimmed in his scarred eyes. Understood, Majesty. But it will not come to that. Strength has never once failed the Dominion in 10,000 years. It will not fail us now, against one ship crewed by a species that only just learned to leave its own atmosphere. Sarn Vec watched the general stride from the chamber, jaw set, purpose renewed, and felt, for the first time in 40 years of loyal Dominion service, genuinely, quietly afraid for his own people. The Third Fleet arrived at the heliopause of Sol system in perfect battle formation. 25 Dominion cruisers arrayed in the precise, elegant geometry that 3,000 years of tactical doctrine insisted was the single most effective assault pattern in the galaxy. A wall of scarite armor and resonance cannon that had, in living memory, never once failed to end a negotiation on unambiguously Dominion terms before the first shot was even fired. Waiting for them was a single vessel, the Meridian. One ship, General Collier said from the command chair of his flagship, the Warden's fist, disbelief and grim satisfaction warring openly in his voice as he surveyed the tactical display. They send one ship to answer 25 of ours. Either the humans are the single greatest bluffers in the recorded history of this galaxy, or they are exactly as foolish as I always privately suspected Sarn Vec's report made them sound to anyone with actual combat experience. Sir, his tactical officer said, voice tight with something he was visibly trying to keep out of it. Long-range scans confirm, that's the same vessel from the Admiral's diplomatic contact 3 weeks ago, the Meridian. No additional human vessels detected anywhere in system. Sir. Not one. Then let us end this quickly, and with as little unnecessary damage to their ship as good tactics allow, Collier said, and opened the channel. Envoy Elena Reyes's face appeared on the main screen, calm as still water, though something in her eyes now carried a weight it hadn't during the earlier negotiations. General Collier, she said, I confess I was hoping the Dominion would send someone still willing to keep talking this time. The time for talking has passed, Envoy, Collier said, his voice carrying the flat, practiced finality of a man who had delivered this exact ultimatum, in one form or another, on a dozen other worlds across 4 decades of service. The Dominion Council has issued its terms. Submit your technology for formal study, accept a garrison of Dominion peacekeepers aboard your reefs, and acknowledge our authority over the trade lanes bordering your territory. Refuse, and the Third Fleet will demonstrate personally why no species in 10,000 years of Dominion history has ever refused us twice. Reyes was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, there was no anger in her voice at all. Only a tired, ancient sort of sorrow, the particular sound of someone who had hoped, genuinely and against considerable historical odds, for a different answer than the one she'd just received. General, I want you to understand, before anything else happens here, that what comes next is not something we wanted, she said. We do not fight to conquer. We have never once, in the entirety of our recorded history among the stars, fired first at anyone. But I will not let the Dominion take our reefs, our children's nurseries, or our people's freedom, and I think, somewhere beneath the orders you've been given, you already suspect that refusing you today is not remotely the same thing as being defeated by you. Please, reconsider before it's too late to withdraw your fleet. No one else needs to learn what we're truly capable of, not today, and honestly, I would prefer never. Bold words, Collier said. From a single, unarmed vessel facing 25 battle cruisers, with a combined firepower this galaxy has rarely seen assembled in one place. He cut the channel without waiting for a response. Target their propulsion and shield generators. Non-lethal disable pattern only. I want that ship intact enough for the Fabrication Guild to study properly once this is over. Fire. 25 Dominion cruisers unleashed a full coordinated salvo of resonance cannon fire, beams of coherent energy that, across 3,000 years, had cracked open the shields of 100 conquered civilizations and ended 1,000 sieges without ever once failing to do exactly what Dominion doctrine promised they would do. The beams bent, Not deflected in any way. The Warden's fist sensors had a category 4. Bent, curving around the Meridian's hull in slow, impossible arcs, like light refracting gently through still water, scattering harmlessly into the dark beyond without ever once touching the hull they'd been aimed at. Impossible, Collier whispered, half rising from his command chair. Report. What in the Dominion's name just happened to our weapons fire? Sir, His science officer's hands were shaking visibly over the console now. Sir, their hull isn't deflecting our beams with any shield configuration our library recognizes. It's matching them, sir. Matching the exact resonance frequency of our cannons in real time and inverting the phase by precisely half a cycle. Our own beams are canceling themselves out right at the hull boundary, before impact. It's not a shield in any sense we understand, sir. It's a conversation our weapons are having with their ship, and our weapons are losing that argument every single time without exception. Bridge of the Steadfast Vigil, 2nd Cruiser in formation. Lieutenant Commander Yara Threll, no relation to the Emperor, a fact she'd spent her entire career quietly explaining, watched her own ship's cannon fire dissolve into the dark alongside every other beam in the formation, and felt something cold settle into her stomach that had nothing to do with the ship's climate controls. Continue firing, came the fleet-wide order from Collier's flagship. Vary the frequency spectrum. Force them to keep up. She gave the order, watched her weapons crew comply, watched the Steadfast Vigil's beams join 24 others cycling through every frequency in the Dominion's considerable tactical library, and watched, with mounting dread, the Meridian match every single one without visible strain, without slowing, without so much as a flicker in the slow, patient pulse of its bioluminescent hull. It's not even trying, her weapons officer said quietly, almost to himself. Commander, it's not even trying hard. Look at the resonance output curve. It's barely above idle. Bridge of the Warden's fist. Sir, the sensor officer said, voice cracking now. Their resonance core, it's not calculating our frequencies reactively after we fire. It's predicting them. It read the harmonic signature of our first 3 volleys and it's already anticipated the next 40 easily. It's not defending against our weapons anymore, sir, in any active sense. I think it's just playing along until it decides it's finished. In the heavy, terrible silence that followed that report, the Meridian spoke again. Not through the narrow tactical channel this time, but broadcast openly across every frequency the 3rd Fleet's combined sensor array could detect. Reyes's voice calm and heavy with genuine, unmistakable regret. General Collier, that was your one demonstration. I would very much like it to also be your last. Please, withdraw your fleet before this goes any further. Belay that transmission entirely, Collier snarled at his own bridge crew, refusing to even acknowledge it. All ships close to point-blank range and engage direct fire. If beam weapons cannot break their shields, we will break them with sheer accumulated mass. The Dominion cruisers surged forward in tight formation, and the Meridian, for the first time in the entire engagement, moved. It did not accelerate away, the way a frightened vessel would. It did not maneuver evasively, hunting for cover that didn't exist in open space. It simply turned, slow and unhurried, to face the oncoming fleet head-on, and the pale luminous veins beneath its coralbone hull began to pulse in a deliberate, building rhythm that climbed and climbed and climbed further still. Sir, resonance output is climbing exponentially, the science officer reported, real panic bleeding into his voice now, all pretense of composure gone. Whatever that ship's core is doing, it's no longer merely canceling our beam weapons one at a time. It's reading the structural harmonic of our entire fleet formation simultaneously. Every cruiser's hull, every drive core, every shield generator, it's mapping all 25 ships at once in real time, and I have no model that explains how. That's not possible, Collier said, though his voice had lost every trace of its earlier certainty. No computation system in this galaxy can track that many independent variables in real time simultaneously. General. Sarnvek's voice cut in over the fleet-wide channel, sharp and absolute. The Admiral had accompanied the 3rd Fleet as formal observer, at the Emperor's explicit insistence, and had watched the entire engagement unfold from the Warden's Fist's secondary bridge in grim, silent confirmation of every fear he'd carried home from the Meridian's living amphitheater. I am invoking Emperor's Standing Order 7. Effective immediately. Withdraw the fleet. Now. This is my command, Admiral, not yours to countermand. General Collier. Sarn's voice was iron, carrying the full authority of 40 years of unbroken service. The Emperor's order was explicit and unambiguous. If you found yourself outmatched, you were to withdraw with no shame attached whatsoever. You are outmatched, General. I watched it happen with my own eyes, and so, I suspect, did you, somewhere beneath the pride that's currently keeping you from saying it aloud. Do not let 10,000 years of institutional pride cost 25 ships and every single soul currently serving aboard them. Withdraw the fleet. For one long, terrible, suspended moment, General Collier said nothing at all, staring fixedly at the tactical display where the Meridian's resonance signature continued climbing toward some threshold none of his instruments possessed a name for, watching 25 ships' worth of lives hang, quite literally, on his next decision. Then, from the human vessel, one final transmission, not directed to the fleet's tactical channel this time, but broadcast wide, gentle, and almost pleading in a way that landed harder on the Warden's fist's bridge than any threat could have. Please, we don't want to do this. All ships? Collier said. Each word dragged out of him like a tooth pulled without anesthetic. Full reverse, all engines. Withdraw to Rally Point Threl 9 immediately. That is a direct order, and I expect it followed without further hesitation. The Third Fleet scattered into retreat, 25 cruisers turning as one in a maneuver they drilled 1,000 times for offense and never once for this, and the Meridian's building resonance died away smoothly, its pulsing light slowing back to the same calm, unhurried rhythm it had held since the engagement first began, as if it had never once seriously considered using whatever terrible potential it had so briefly, so effortlessly, gathered. It let every single Dominion ship go, without pursuit, without a parting shot, without so much as a demand for the reparations any Dominion admiral would have considered an absolute minimum after a failed assault. The council chamber beneath Threl Prime had never, in the memory of any living counselor present, been quite so silent. General Collier stood before the throne, stripped of his battle armor's ceremonial trim. His scarred face carved from something harder than shame and, somewhere underneath it, considerably softer than the pride he'd carried into that chamber 3 weeks earlier. 25 ships, Emperor Threl 9 said quietly, his voice carrying easily through a silence so complete it felt almost physical. Full firepower, direct engagement against a single vessel you yourself described, before you left, as unarmed. Report the outcome to this council, General, in your own words. We fired everything we had, Majesty, Collier said, and for the first time in 40 years of distinguished service. His voice shook, just slightly, in a way no one in that chamber had ever heard from him before. Every beam, every frequency variation, every tactic 3,000 years of Dominion doctrine has ever developed. Their ship did not evade us, did not counterattack us. It simply disagreed with our weapons, Majesty, at a level our own instruments still cannot fully explain to my satisfaction. And when I finally ordered a direct assault at close range, it began mapping our entire fleet's structural resonance in real time simultaneously across all 25 vessels. I believe, Majesty, had the engagement continued even another 60 seconds past the point I finally gave the order to withdraw, they could have ended all 25 ships at once. Not destroyed us, Majesty. I want to be precise about this, because I have thought of little else for 3 weeks. Unmade us. Every drive core, every shield generator, every weapon system silenced simultaneously, the way a conductor silences an entire orchestra with a single closing gesture of one hand. And yet, the Emperor said, you stand here today to report this failure to me directly, rather than drifting dead in the void at the edge of Sol System, as you yourself describe was fully within their power to arrange. Why, General? I want the Council to hear your honest answer. Collier's jaw tightened visibly, working through something clearly larger than simple military report. Because they let us go, Majesty. They asked us twice in plain and unmistakable language to withdraw before it ever came to that. And when I finally gave the order, the Meridian simply stopped. No pursuit. No parting shot to punish our arrogance. No demand for reparation, formal apology, or any concession whatsoever beyond our own departure. They watched 25 Dominion warships flee before them, Majesty, and they let every one of us go home. Silence again, deeper this time, as the full weight of that admission settled slowly over the entire chamber, counselor by counselor. 10,000 years. The Emperor said at last, rising from his throne of black scarite stone with the slow, deliberate movement of a man carrying the accumulated weight of every one of those years at once. 10,000 years, the Dominion has measured strength using one single currency, and one alone, the raw capacity to destroy whatever opposed us. Every species we have ever encountered across that span, we measured by how quickly it broke beneath our fleets, and we called the resulting silence order. We called it peace, and told ourselves it was the only kind worth having. He looked out slowly over the assembled council, Fabrication Guild elders who had spent 3 weeks arguing for covert reverse engineering operations, military commanders who had spent the crisis demanding immediate punitive action, diplomats who had spent the entire affair arguing every possible angle except, perhaps, the one that actually mattered most. Today, a species possessing a single ship held, quite genuinely, the power to erase 25 of our finest cruisers in under 2 minutes of engagement, and chose, instead, to spare every single soul aboard them, for the second time in as many encounters with the Dominion. I put it to this council plainly, and I want an honest answer from every counselor present. Which of our two peoples, today, demonstrated the greater strength? No one answered. In the deepening silence, no one needed to. Captain Voss, the Emperor said, turning his weathered gaze to where Iron Voss stood quietly near the chamber's edge. You told this council 3 weeks ago that the humans did not walk our own straight line toward mechanical perfection, that they asked an entirely different question of matter, and were rewarded as a result with an entirely different kind of power. I ask you now, before this full council, what question should the Dominion itself be learning to ask, if it hopes to survive the century that is now coming for all of us? Iron Voss stepped forward, her organic eye steady, her augmented one dimmed, for once, in something that looked, for a woman built half of cold Dominion machinery, remarkably, unmistakably like humility. I believe, Majesty, the question is not how do we defeat them, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the still chamber. I believe the true question is what have we forgotten how to ask, across 10,000 years of assuming, without ever seriously testing the assumption, that our own way was the only correct way worth trying. The humans did not become powerful by learning to copy us better than we copy ourselves. They became powerful by refusing, from the very beginning of their engineering history, to accept that our particular path was the only one worth walking. Perhaps it is time the Dominion learned to do the same, not by becoming human ourselves, Majesty, which I do not believe is possible or even desirable, but by remembering that we, too, once had to invent our very first ship from absolutely nothing at all, long before 10,000 years of accumulated pride convinced us there was nothing meaningful left worth inventing. Emperor Threll IX was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words visibly against the full accumulated weight of his reign, and when he spoke again, his voice carried through the chamber and, by wide public relay, across every world of the Dominion currently listening to this unprecedented broadcast. Send word to the Terran envoy, he said. Tell her the Dominion formally withdraws its ultimatum, in its entirety, effective immediately. Tell her the Dominion requests, instead, a full and formal audience, not as conquerors addressing the conquered, and not as supplicants approaching some clearly superior power, but as two peoples who have each, in these past 3 weeks, learned something genuinely true about the other at real cost to both. Tell her that General Threx Collier, who personally led the assault against her vessel, will deliver this message himself in person so that the humans understand clearly. The Dominion remains capable, even after 10,000 years, of admitting openly when it has been wrong. That, too, I have come to believe, is its own kind of strength. Perhaps, in the end, the only kind that truly lasts across the centuries. General Collier's apology, the shuttle ride to the Meridian, was the longest of Threx Collier's 40-year career, though it lasted barely 20 minutes. He had faced down warlords. He had led the final assault at Ixari with 3 separate wounds already bleeding through his armor. He had stood before the Grand Council and admitted, in front of every peer whose respect he'd spent decades earning, that he had been outmatched by an unarmed ship. None of it, he found, had prepared him for the particular discomfort of standing once more in the Meridian's living amphitheater. watching its walls pulse gently at the sound of his own voice, waiting for Envoy Reyes to arrive. She came alone, which surprised him. No security detail, no visible caution at all toward the man who'd ordered a full assault against her ship 3 weeks prior. "General," she said, "I understand you have a message for me." "I have an apology, Envoy," Collier said, and found, to his own considerable surprise, that the words came more easily than he'd expected. "Not the Council's message, that I will deliver in full, but my own first. I ordered an attack against a people who had done nothing but ask, twice, to be left in peace. I did so because I believed strength meant never once hesitating, and because I had built 40 years of identity around never being the man who backed down. I was wrong on both counts, and I am told that admitting it plainly is worth something. I hope that's true, Envoy, because it's all I currently have to offer you." Reyes studied him for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her calm expression. "It's worth quite a lot, actually, General," she said finally. "More than you might think. My people have a saying, I don't know if your translator will render it well, that the measure of a person isn't whether they're ever wrong. Everyone is wrong, eventually, about something that matters. The measure is what they do in the 60 seconds right after they realize it. You gave that order to withdraw. You're standing here now, saying this to my face instead of sending it through a subordinate. That's the part that matters to me, General. Not the 3 weeks before it." Collier bowed, deeper than protocol strictly required, and delivered the Emperor's formal message, the withdrawn ultimatum, the request for genuine audience, the acknowledgement unprecedented in 10,000 years of Dominion history, that they had met something they could not simply outbuild. Reyes listened to all of it in patient silence, and when he finished, she smiled, small, genuine, and considerably warmer than anything she'd offered him during the tense weeks prior. "Tell your Emperor," she said, "that the compact accepts, and tell him, too, that we'd very much like to start by teaching each other something, rather than studying each other like specimens. That's usually where real peace actually begins, General, not with treaties, though we'll need those too eventually. With two people simply agreeing to be curious about each other instead of afraid." Epilogue. The Reef remembers 6 months later, Admiral Sarnvek stood once more in the living amphitheater at the heart of the meridian, watching the coralbone walls pulse gently with the sound of careful, ongoing negotiation drifting from the adjoining chamber, trade agreements, technology exchange protocols, a formal recognition of Terran sovereignty that would have been utterly unthinkable to the Dominion of a year before, and which was now, remarkably, simply the newest item on a long and growing agenda. Envoy Elena Reyes stood beside him, watching the same proceedings with the patient, unhurried calm that Sarn had come, over 6 months of regular contact, to understand was not weakness at all, but rather the deep confidence of a people who had never once needed to prove their strength by using it against anyone. "Your General Collier apologized to me personally, you know," Reyes said. "In person, no subordinate to hide behind. Took real courage that, more honestly than firing on us ever did. He is a soldier who spent 40 years believing strength meant never once backing down," Sarn said. "Learning that genuine strength sometimes means backing down anyway, in front of everyone who once respected him for never doing it. That has cost him more, I think, than any single battle ever did in his entire career. He requested reassignment to the Joint Diplomatic Liaison Office last month. I believe he means to spend the rest of his service learning what he spent the first 40 years refusing to consider." "For what it's worth," Reyes said, watching the slow pulse of the ship's living walls. "The Meridian wouldn't have killed anyone that day, General Collier's fears notwithstanding. Not really. Even at full resonance lock across all 25 ships, we'd have silenced your fleet, not destroyed it outright. Stranded you a few hours from home, thoroughly embarrassed, maybe a little humbled in a way that stings for a while and then heals. We've never actually had to use the full weapon in genuine earnest, against anyone in our entire history among the stars. I'm glad, more than I can easily say, that it stayed that way with the Dominion too." Sarn glanced at her, genuinely surprised. "You allowed us to believe the very worst possible outcome, then? Deliberately?" Reyes smiled, small and knowing, in the particular way he'd come to recognize as her preparing to say something that mattered considerably more than it first sounded. "No, Admiral. Everything I told your council from the very first conversation was completely true. The Meridian really could have ended your entire fleet in that engagement, exactly as your officers feared, if I had ever chosen to let her go that far. I simply never told you, in advance, precisely where we'd choose to draw our own line before we reached it. Turns out that not disclosing the limits of your own mercy in advance is its own quiet kind of deterrent, and also, I'd like to think, its own kind of trust, once the danger's passed and you finally learn where that line actually was. She looked out at the slow, patient pulse of the ship's living walls, her expression somewhere between fondness and old, hard-won wisdom. We grew this entire fleet the same way we grow everything else, Admiral, around the idea that real strength was never actually about how much destruction you're capable of delivering. It's about how much restraint you can genuinely afford, once you've already quietly won. Word of the Dominion's reversal spread slowly across 100 worlds in the following months, not as a single dramatic announcement, but the way real change usually spreads, in overlapping ripples. Joint research stations established along the border between Dominion and Terran space, the first tentative exchange students from Threll Prime studying resonance cultivation techniques aboard human training vessels, a formal apology broadcast across every Dominion world explaining, in the Emperor's own words, precisely what had been learned and precisely what it had cost to learn it. Not every world welcomed the change. General Collier's old faction within the military continued, quietly, to argue that the Dominion had simply been outmaneuvered by clever diplomacy rather than genuinely humbled by superior wisdom, that somewhere, eventually, the old doctrine of strength through raw force would prove itself right again, the way it always had before. Counselor Dessa Oren never fully forgave the Fabrication Guild's confident predictions for having been so thoroughly, publicly wrong, and spent the following year quietly funding independent research into cultivated material science, unwilling to admit, even to herself, that she was doing precisely what Captain Voss had recommended all along. But on Threll Prime, in the great chamber beneath the twin suns, Emperor Threll IX kept, on the wall behind his throne of black scarite stone, a single small fragment of coral bone material, a gift from Envoy Reyes, grown specifically to commemorate the first formal treaty between their two peoples, still faintly, softly luminous, still humming very quietly, in a rhythm that matched, if anyone in the chamber ever bothered to listen closely enough, the Emperor's own patient, unhurried heartbeat. Outside the Meridian's translucent hull, the stars of Sol System continued turning in their old, unhurried orbits, entirely indifferent to empires and reefs and treaties alike. But somewhere in the vast space between them, something had finally, quietly, permanently changed. Not a conquest, and not a surrender, but the slow, deliberate growth of something neither species had ever successfully cultivated before, not in 10,000 years of Dominion history, and not in humanity's own much shorter one. A peace grown patiently from the ground up instead of built, hastily and by force, from the top down. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Dominion found, to its own considerable, lasting surprise, that it did not mind so much learning to grow along with it.